San Francisco is the base for a team of underwater filmmakers led by Al Giddings. He's been responsible for making the wonders of the underwater world familiar to people who have never themselves worn a diving mask or penetrated beneath the surface of the ocean. He currently works in a self-contained production base in the foothills of Berkeley, overlooking San Francisco Harbor. "20 years ago, Al exchanged his spear gun for a camera and began a life that has taken him to all of the major oceans of the world. Here, filming expeditions are planned and past achievements cataloged in slide files and film racks. And he now has one of the greatest collections of underwater images in the entire world."
Put Jeff after these two pages and a question mark.
There is one area of his work that appeals to him above all else.
On these two pages would be used. Well, I think without a question, some of the most exciting images that I'm privileged to put on film are those images that come when we're shooting natural history programming. Humpback whales, for an example. I had an encounter with a mother and calf that was really quite humbling. In this case, for reasons I'll never understand, this mother with her newborn calf let me approach to a point where the newborn calf's eye was almost filling the frame. To stare into the eye of an animal 100,000 pounds, some 50 feet long, and see that response, not that glazed look, but an eye that flicks back and forth and watches every little nuance, every movement on my part, is very provocative stuff. Then very gently, she brushed me aside with her great 12-foot flipper. No harm done, and avoided any sort of collision with her tail and moved away. To know the camera is turning and to know that the image that you're recording is perhaps the first in the world, and to return to the boat after having shot a sequence like the mother and calf sequence is one of the greatest moments in doing what I do. The sequence with Doug Laughlin and the dolphin certainly is unique, and I doubt in my lifetime that I'll ever experience anything quite like it again. That animal, for reasons we'll never understand, came to a certain peninsula in the Bahamas, one of the Bahama Islands, and for about 3 months, divers saw it almost every day. Again, we were in open water, not even in a bay. There was a deep drop-off. The water 500 yards from where we were shooting was thousands of feet deep, and certainly the animal had the ability to leave at any time and was not corralled in any way. It's an air breather, an animal that has to surface, of course, to breathe, would allow me to hold it underwater, to stroke it, and to restrain it a bit, and would totally relax, emitting a series of squeaks, and if I stroked it and talked to it very softly, talking into my mouthpiece, the eye would close slowly, as one would expect from, say, a domestic Cocker Spaniel. I've never ceased to be amazed at those things that happen before our rolling camera. Many, many times we're filming in a situation where it would appear to everyone to be extremely dangerous, and We find that those animals that were thought to be unapproachable just a few years ago are totally approachable and, in fact, not dangerous at all. I recall working in Tahiti a few years ago, and several fishermen came forward and said, "Have you seen the pond at the end of the pier? The children there play with sharks." We went there and we filmed children playing with gray nurse sharks that, if you read some of the text on that animal, it's considered by many people in the scientific community to be a dangerous shark. Indeed, it's not.
Off the Maldive Islands in the Indian Ocean, Al was to film another improbable shark story. Two underwater photographers, Herwith Voigtman and Vreeni Graber, had been filming the undoubtedly dangerous gray reef shark, which is known to have attacked divers. In spite of the obvious risks, the pair had been working with the sharks unprotected in open water. After a time, Voigtman felt he had developed some kind of mutual understanding with the sharks. So confident had he become that the sharks would not attack, that he began to feed them underwater by hand. This, Al wanted to film.
I think Voigtman was perhaps a little concerned about me. We had met for the first time, and he wasn't sure whether I was gutsy enough to sort of stand my ground and indeed record what he was doing. But after the first or second dive, we smiled at each other and said, hey, this is a formula and a team that's going to produce some images, the likes of which no one else has seen. I was shooting high speed as well, slow motion. So what he did was recorded, I think, in the very best possible way. We had worked together for 3 or 4 days. He volunteered, if you can imagine, one morning to make his point that these animals were trainable, that he would actually put a fish in his mouth and allow a gray reef shark to come in and take it from his mouth. He was that confident that the relationship that he'd developed, the system that he'd worked out with these animals would allow him to do that. Moray eels have traditionally been considered very dangerous. Vreeni not only feeds sharks by hand now, but moray eels as well. The size of the animals that she was feeding before my rolling camera were such that either of the two animals she handled could have stripped the flesh from her hand in a second. But she not only fed them, but would stroke their bodies and had an intimate relationship with those animals that, again, would have been thought impossible just a few years ago. The experience in the Maldives with Rennie and Hareworth was very exciting for me. I'm aware that morays can be approached and that sharks can be approached now, but it was an opportunity to record some very dramatic events that I think will dispel some of the fears and some of the sort of fantasies that have been associated with these animals.
Wow, this material, it's great.
Yeah, are we going to include this mass shot?
You know, there's a second shot, another option here, one that's in the library there. Why don't I get it? I'll put it out. You don't have to cut it in now. Let me get it.
It's in the CDC file.
The library contains nearly 1 million feet of film. It would run on the screen for over 200 hours. It's valuable not only to other filmmakers, but also to the scientific community, a fact that gives Al Giddings additional satisfaction. But in spite of his passion for underwater wildlife photography, his skills have drawn him inevitably into film production, not only as a cameraman, but as a producer and director.
So, I mean, that's jeopardy, and indeed it was. I mean, there was 2,000 mines in the forward, forward hold. I'd use that for sure.
Okay.
Nice stuff. And then the light, you know, light.
The light.
Wait, back up on that. You're past the tank? I mean, the tank's sitting on the deck?
Tank's coming up.
Okay, this is all bridge. All
right, here it is.
So,
Okay.
Hold that.
Yeah.
That's a nice image. That's a nice image.
One of the great privileges in my life was going to Truck Lagoon early on, before many divers had been there. Truck, of course, was the site of an enormous battle between the Americans and Japanese, and in fact is considered by most to be sort of the American Pearl Harbor of sorts. The Japanese had, I guess, 60, perhaps 70 ships at anchor. The Americans moved, or Allied forces moved 4 carriers within 90 miles, and in 49 hours of constant bombing sunk, I guess, everything in the lagoon. 60, 70 ships and thousands of lives. Some of the ships in very deep water, especially the Ikuku, had the remains of 2,300 men aboard. There was certainly the excitement of all of this unexploded ordnance. San Francisco Maru, in 170 feet of water, contained 2,000 landmines. The ships were intact, in excellent condition, but reading some of the history of Truck Lagoon and then finally going there and discovering ship after ship after ship that no one had looked at since they had gone to the seafloor February 17th, 44, was an amazing experience. As well as the human history, there is an incredible transition happening there. The ships now have been transformed from implements of war to majestic, coral-laden reef communities. It is a fantastic place to dive.
Al has a workshop on the premises.
Mark, let me, yeah, there you go.
I think it's gonna work perfect.
Make sure that's tight, huh? I mean, if it's not tight and it slips underwater, we
But I
have a
think
problem.
it's perfect. Okay.
With his team, who double as divers and photographers, he designs his own equipment. Here, he builds the underwater systems and lighting arrays to his specifications, and then, before shooting, tests them very carefully.
Use the calipers, check it here, and then just run in really slowly, Rich, huh? That looks great. That'll really anodize well. A really unique piece of equipment in our shop is this test chamber. The chamber allows us to develop a new piece of equipment, place it in the chamber, close the chamber, and pressurize it. We can go to, Rich, give me a hand with this. We can go to 250, 200 feet. Very useful, of course, shooting constantly underwater to have something that allows us to test the unit before we're in the field. Well, there's little doubt that this is the ultimate for shooting feature films. We've taken a lens that was an extreme wide-angle lens to start with, added another optical element of our own design. That element, combined with a hemisphere that we developed years ago, gives us the inherent angle of the lens, excellent color saturation, and in fact, this is the lens that we did for your eyes only, the Bond picture. When we shoot a feature film and go underwater, we just complicate the situation tenfold. You not only have to shoot close-ups and macro close-ups and put drama into the film, you have to survive. You have to breathe, you have to use an aqualung, you have to use compressed air, you have to be concerned not only with the focus, but also concerned with how deep you're working and what kind of decompression you're into, and are the principles. For an example, Robert Shaw, this is his second dive for the day. Is he going to get bent if we stay another 10 minutes? You have all the problems a filmmaker has topside, but you're working underwater in a very hostile environment. You have to consider temperature, you have to consider currents, you have to consider light, you have to consider pressure, physiology, physics, the mechanical aspects, and keep it all waterproof as well.
The wreck and the exciting action in the deep was shot on location. But Giddings has the option of doing some of the underwater filming at the studio in a 70,000-gallon pool built especially for this purpose.
Watch and see that there's no vignette, huh? Because the lens shades are really tight on the left corner. Rich, roll another 10 feet, maybe another 15 feet, okay? And we'll see if we can get the light on a little bit better. Okay. Look for the small letters, like underneath Century, okay? Right. Go ahead, try it.
No, pretty even.
Okay. Look good.
It's really good.
And super sharp, and you're
super
all the way
sharp.
open, huh?
No vignetting on that upper left corner like we had before.
All right, great. That's terrific.
The pool allows Al to review technical problems with his diver cameraman without the pressure of a film schedule. In a world where money is big and costs are high, this is important. There's no time for testing underwater when expensive stars are on standby. And anyway, slippery decks and rough seas are not the best places to make refined technical adjustments.
Quarter of an inch in, huh?
I think that's what the problem was, because
By the time Al goes on location, he likes to have as many of the technical problems behind him as possible.
Side. I mean, if it doesn't vignette with a 9/8, a super wide lens, certainly all the longer focal lengths will be fine.
Not all of Al's work is in a subtropical paradise.
About 3 years ago, we went to the North Pole working on Mysteries of the Sea. The water temperature was 28.5, below freezing, but it doesn't freeze because of the salt content. The surface temperature was 55 below zero, and those two elements combined to make some of the most uncomfortable, yet some of the most stunning and awesome diving I've ever done. An ordinary camera exposed to those extreme temperatures would freeze almost instantly unless it was managed properly. Even before we were underwater, we had problems with the regulators. If you were to just put the mouthpiece in your mouth, exhale a few times, your exhalation would freeze and the valves would freeze. So everything had to be handled in a very special way. We couldn't even test the non-return valves before we were underwater. We were there to document the efforts of a group of Canadian scientists that had been airlifted into that very hostile and remote area. They were doing all sorts of core samples in the ice and looking at the pressure ridges both topside and underwater.
Yep. We will then go over to the chandelier. Right. And on the way, we'll probably go past that array. Okay. And film that over to the chandelier. Okay. And then when the siren goes, the core will be there and we'll go back.
Yeah. Move the regulator up.
Give me a hand.
Yeah. Okay. No. Okay. Why don't we do that for you? I got it. Okay. Oh, that easy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's on.
Okay. Certainly the most frightening thing in working under the ice at the North Pole, or for that matter anywhere, is that you only have one exit hole. The North Pole is some 5 million square miles of ice. I mean, one could swim for hours and hours, and of course you don't have that sort of air supply. So if indeed you lost sight of the hole or became confused and got off the safety line, there would be no retrieving you. The dives at the North Pole, I think, were perhaps some of the most awesome and beautiful that I've made. The visibility there was in excess of 400 feet. The water crystal clear, no movement. Some of the elements that I'm accustomed to experiencing were strangely missing, like surf and water movement and flickering light and so on. It was a great cobalt blue atmosphere. I knew that it was extremely deep, 3 miles of water beneath me. The water so transparent, there was nothing really that the eye could focus on. So you were in this great sort of blue void, almost an outer space atmosphere. One of the discoveries was really quite beautiful. Fresh water leaching through the ice canopy would form crystal chandeliers of tiny spikes of ice, and if you were to run your hand through those chips of ice, they would twinkle with a sound very much like that sound you'd hear if you were to run your fingers through a crystal chandelier. With water temperatures of 28.5 and an exposure time on several occasions exceeding an hour, I finally returned to the surface almost in a state of shock. I mean, the first half an hour we'd function quite well. 45 minutes, the body functions would begin to slow, and anything over an hour, it was very difficult to concentrate, and in fact, a sort of depression would set in.
want anything off, or you want to keep it all on?
Okay, I'd like to get out.
That's unbelievable.
You want any equipment off, Al?
Yeah, I'll get up, and then you can do that.
Okay.
Does that do it for you, shooter? Huh?
Gee, that's beautiful.
It's like being in space, isn't it?
Have you been down?
Yeah, it's going. It gets right. Turn your air off. Huh?
There's no way that can be described. It's a painting. I mean, it's a very sensitive, light powder blues.
And nothing is attached to anything else. Everything floats.
Fabulous.
No bottom,
Fabulous.
just that ceiling. Was it worth all those thousands of miles
it really
of
is.
travel and getting here?
Yeah.
Like that, Joe? Yeah. Okay. Terrific. We've got...
Oh, my fingers are frozen.
At his studio in San Francisco, Al lunches with his crew.
Machine.
It's part of his philosophy that the team that is going to work together and risk their lives together should know each other well. This helps avoid misunderstandings underwater and reduces field problems.
We can pick it up in our truck. It'll go in our truck, huh? I'm sure it will.
They will deliver, but he is not sure how quickly they will.
No, we don't want it delivered. Hold at airport. Go over in the pickup truck. It'll tilt up just like ours. Same profile. Roll right in there.
His kind of work calls for something more than a simple working relationship.
Well, the carnet and everything necessary to work in Australia, that's done. You've
Yeah.
talked to Rodney and...
Yeah, the carnet has been cleared through the International Council, and Rodney advised that we do that, and everything's in order.
Okay, the flight's to Sydney, then from Sydney to Melbourne.
No, we go straight to Melbourne.
Sea lions on Dangerous Reef, South Australia. Al Giddings' next port of call. But it's not the sea lions that the team has come 7,000 miles from California to film. Sea lions are, sad to say, only the bait. Warm-blooded animals like sea lions and man seem to be the favorite food for the most dangerous, powerful, and feared of all creatures in the sea, the great white shark. The great white was also the model for Jaws, but this time it's going to be for real, and Giddings is going to film it.
Only about the colony has dwindled
Tell me
somewhat.
stop. Too shallow. I don't want to tow that camera in.
The first day and no sharks have been sighted yet. The divers know that as long as there are sea lions in the vicinity, they're safe. So they take this opportunity to film a spectacular underwater ballet. But the team has come to film the ocean's super predator, the great white shark.
Apparently the winds are coming up. Yeah, 25 knots.
That's right, it's freshening up.
So what do you think about a better lee or a better place to work?
Well, where I suggest with this wind...
Rodney Fox, the ex-abalone fisherman and South Australian spearfishing champion, has been hired by the expedition to find the sharks. 15 years ago, he survived a horrifying white shark attack. Somewhat surprisingly, he now dedicates his life to finding out more about the animal that nearly caused his death.
At all, and the tides take the scent away to another area, the sharks could just follow that scent and not follow it back to the boat.
Rodney's approach is very comprehensive. He moves into an area that he knows from past experience, white sharks frequent, and starts a baiting process using fish emulsion and so on. And introduces this to the water in a very slow dripping process 24 hours a day. This process creates a scent trail that might reach 5 miles in length. Any animal crossing this scent trail would pick up the scent and start to move along the trail, and if it was going the wrong way, the scent would drop off. The right way certainly would increase, and baiting in this fashion brings the animals to the boat.
That far out would be good, or wait in the rail. Take up a little, Terry, take up.
At last, the expedition has a visitor. Only a small one by great white standards. A baby, just 10 feet long. This is perhaps the ultimate underwater challenge for Al Giddings, the most dangerous animal in the sea to be filmed not with one camera, but 9 cameras simultaneously for a Disney World spectacular.
Certainly the Disney Circle Vision film, The Eternal Sea, was by far the most ambitious project I've worked on. I think the total budget for the film, including projection and all, was something around $7 million. Circle Vision is 360-degree coverage. The system that Disney has is 9 cameras on a single pedestal, all facing vertically into a parasol of mirrors, and the image is deflected by those mirrors at right angles. Each camera covers about 40 degrees, 9 cameras for 360. A staggering business to reload.
But everything's running in the same color.
Yeah.
5, 6 there, 5, 6 dead on.
Okay. 5, 6 all around.
Great. Mirrors are clean.
Mirrors are good, and we're ready to descend on this.
I think a lot of people, millions of people, have seen Circle Vision images of Disneyland, America the Beautiful, and programs like that. This is the first time, of course, it's ever been attempted underwater.
Up. Okay. You got to push this way.
Well, just pull on the top, Terry. There you go. Down slow.
Unlike systems I work with traditionally, it's not reflex. You can't see through the lens, and you can't get behind the camera. And in fact, if you're shooting 360, the only place you can be is above the camera, which makes parallax and lining things up very difficult.
Same as before, huh? We'll drop in, the 2 of us, put the camera in, shackle it down, pull it down so it's level. We use that strap, Rich, with it come along, huh? And we need a bungee on the top as we had before, Terry. Maybe a longer one so we can go around twice and hook it in.
The housing and camera weighs over a ton, in fact 2,260 pounds with the flight package. So it's certainly the largest underwater camera, I guess, in history.
Watch it, Jack.
If anything, it's going to have to go this way.
Okay.
Lowering the camera over the side is of great concern. One of the most dangerous times, should a cable snap or the system get loose, 2,000 pounds swinging in the air, was extremely dangerous. Getting the camera in and out on most occasions concerned me more than perhaps the animals that we were working with. Combine that with the fact that we couldn't go outside the cage.
Take this off. Give me some slack. Take this off. All right, come on down.
Once that was set up, then we would let the cage drift back off the stern. The baiting would go on, and the animals would be brought to the cage and to the divers.
More sharks have arrived, and this time they're the big ones. 20 feet long and some 3,000 pounds in weight.
I think the great white is the ultimate predator, certainly the most awesome beast in the sea. not only for those people who work in the sea, but for the general public as well, with films like Jaws and others of that ilk. People have had a lot of exposure to this animal. It is the most majestic, the most capable, and certainly the most sophisticated predator in the sea. Once in interview, I asked a young man who'd just been in one of our cages for the first time about his feelings. And this fellow was very experienced, a diver and a scientist. And I said, "Tim, what did you think?" And he said, "I dropped into the cage, looked around, was confronted by two enormous animals, perhaps 1.5 tons each, descended to the bottom of the cage on my hands and knees and cowered for the first 5 minutes." I certainly relate to those emotions. I try never to think of the cost of the raw stock when I'm shooting, especially a natural history subject. I sort of consider film, or psychologically consider film as a writer considers note paper. In this case, however, each time I turn the camera on, I'd be very conscious of the fact that in something slightly over 4 minutes, we would run $3,600 worth of film.
Quick, get the crane, let's haul the camera out. It's leaking like crazy.
The unbelievable has happened. The $1 million underwater camera is leaking. Months of planning and effort are suddenly at risk.
It's pretty heavy. Take this, fix it. Hook on the kite. Hook on the kite. Tag line. There's a line. Check it. Tag it. Don't worry. Let go, Jack. We got it. Nice to hop in the water. Hey, wait. Put that tag in the water. Let me watch it. Let's go. Put it behind there. Let's just, hit it down. All right. Okay. Over. Got watch your deck. Knock on, quiet. All right. Yep. A lot of water. You got to get the thing up as quick as possible. Crack it so it'll drain out the bottom as soon as you can, huh? Down. That's the first. Can't believe it. Crack it over. Yeah.
Everyone thought for sure the cameras were ruined. Imagine this $1 million system. Things were disassembled, a thorough cleaning, relubrication, and the system was reassembled. And when the button was pushed, to our total amazement, it was online and running again. The cameras used are older Mitchell cameras, not state-of-the-art electronic cameras, but reliable ball-bearing cameras.
Well, let's let them out here in the sun. They can be drying. Oh, okay.
Also with the team is marine biologist John McCosker, director of the Steinhardt Aquarium, San Francisco. He's hoping to dart a shark with a telemetric device in an effort to learn more about this most mysterious and magnificent animal.
We've had them up on the top deck here, you know, so you've got to be really careful. You might have to sidestep them very far.
You've never seen me dance as well as I can dance. Look at this, Rod.
Transmitters in the dart will give information about body temperature and swimming speed. But it's both dangerous and difficult to spear the great white.
6 or 8 floating baits out here, and let him come in and take 1 or 2 or 3. Well, look how there he is now.
Hit him!
Couldn't reach it, Rod. He was right there.
Yeah.
I was there. Just didn't want to do it long enough.
No, you're right.
All right. County. Look at this, Rod.
You could swallow that orange boy.
This thing's pointing directly at him. He's off the port side of the boat.
Approximate distance?
About 50 meters. He's coming towards the stern.
Scientific data is a byproduct of many of Al's activities, and one in which he takes great pride.
35.
Whoa, boy. Okay. Watch out.
It's very exciting to apply our tools, our film tools, in such a way that scientists can indeed analyze our material. I use on expeditions like the Australia expedition a very high-speed camera capable of 200, 300, 400 frames per second. And this tool allows us to look at that animal in a way that no one's ever looked at it before.
Sometimes just having the right camera and lenses isn't enough to capture images never seen before. The scientific and artistic demands of Al's work require him to go to even greater and greater depths.
The biggest constraint at this point in time is bottom time. If we work at 100 feet, we can only stay 25 minutes without being concerned about the bends and so on. If you go to 200 feet, you can only stay safely 5 minutes without all this support business and decompression business. So the exposure time is our greatest concern.
In 1971, a major advance was made with the invention of the Johnson Sea Link. This unusual underwater vehicle, invented by Ed Link, was specifically designed for research and can take scientists to study environments once beyond their view. Capable of descending to 2,000 feet, the Johnson Sea Link goes 4 times deeper than the average World War II submarine.
Well, the Johnson Sea Link is really unique in that it's a taxi, an undersea taxi. As an underwater filmmaker, the Johnson Sea Link allows me to preview everything on the bottom, look at everything on the bottom before I'm ever exposed to open sea. We drive around in this great plexiglass front sphere and look very carefully at everything, and in fact turn our lights on and light it and look at it, and then only work on those things that we have sort of surveyed. So it cuts the amount of time, increases efficiency, and it is a fantastic new tool to do the sort of documentation and undersea work that I do.
The pilot and scientific observer remain safely at sea level pressure in the forward sphere. The diver, who will eventually leave the taxi, remains inside until the air pressure in his aft compartment has been increased to match that of the surrounding water pressure. Underwater archaeologists have benefited greatly from the use of this vehicle. One of its most important missions has been to search for a sunken Civil War battleship. The Monitor, shown here with the Confederate ship the Merrimac, was sunk in 1862 by rough Atlantic seas. In 1979, Al was asked to document one of the recovery expeditions.
The Monitor is in about 230 feet of water, and to film it from the surface and undergo all the surface problems of waves and currents and so on, plus that it's 230 feet would have required very exotic gas breathing mixture and so on. Without the Johnson Sea Link, it would have been much more dangerous and really beyond standard scuba diving.
As he explores the Monitor, the diver breathes a mixture of oxygen and helium, carefully combined for these depths. But to dive deeper and avoid exposure problems entirely, divers need to be protected by a suit like this one.
The advantages of using a personal submersible like the gym suit are enormous as it relates to decompression and all the physiology. The person is pretty much as one would be in a submarine. The body isn't exposed to the pressure. You're not breathing gas under pressure. You don't have to go through the decompression problem. We could go to the sea floor in 1,000 feet of water, spend an hour or 2 hours or 5 hours, come back to the surface, open the hatch, step out and have lunch. As opposed to a diver exposed to that same depth, for that same period of time, might undergo 12, 15, 20, 30 hours of decompression, hanging at various levels to return to the surface safely.
Safety was uppermost on Al's mind as he tested the suit for the high-tech sequence in Mysteries of the Sea. Created for commercial diving and extremely expensive to operate, there are only 15 gym suits operating worldwide. Al commissioned Dr. Sylvia Earle from the California Academy of Sciences to be the first scientist to evaluate the suit in a deep ocean dive. Experimenting with the suit's dexterity and flexibility was just one of the many tests they performed. The gym suit itself withstands the enormous external pressure. The diver inside remains at sea level pressure. Nitrogen bubbles therefore can't form in the diver's bloodstream or expand during the ascent, eliminating the dreaded bends.
Dry, not bad. It's really working fine.
Dr. Earle is already inside the suit. Al's team is looking for shallow water to make a test in preparation for a deep dive. The yellow submarine will taxi here to the bottom. Inside, Al will be the only one communicating with her, and there will be no tether to the surface.
Built into the suit is an oxygen purification system, so you rebreathe the same gas over and over again. It goes through a circuit, through a series of hoses and filters and so on, is purified, and oxygen is added as needed by an automatic valve. So you have really the same system that's used in outer space, used in this case in inner space.
All systems worked at 75 feet. So 2 days later, off the coast of Oahu, they dived beyond the reach of sunlight, 1,250 feet. But the average depth of the ocean is 12,000 feet. For further exploration, scientists rely on a considerably larger submarine, the Alvin, a research vessel operated by Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute. In 1979, Al was invited to document an expedition to the hot water vents of the Galapagos Rift.
It was an hour-and-a-half free fall to the bottom, more than 1.5 miles down, no tether or no connection to the surface. Once on the bottom in 8,500, 8,400 feet of water, we would begin our work, research and science work, and my film work and documenting all of this. We'd be on the bottom for about 6 hours. It would then take an hour-and-a-half free ascent to return to the surface. So each dive was a 9-hour commitment, and I look at it as one of the most
dynamic, most exciting events ever for me underwater.
From this cramped 7-foot sphere, Al controlled a still camera, a sound recorder, and a 16mm film camera. At the same time, he operated an external video camera. Attached to a remote control arm, outside the sub, this exterior video unit was specifically designed to withstand the more than 500 tons of pressure exerted at this depth. This expedition was bringing biologists to view firsthand the spectacular undersea life forms supported by chemosynthesis, not photosynthesis. And there were surprises. This gossamer animal, nicknamed dandelion, is actually in the jellyfish family. Among the myriad of discoveries was a new family of crustaceans, crabs without color and without sight. The retrieval of hundreds of creatures and thousands of images has given marine science a new vision and understanding of the underwater world. When certain of these animals were dissected, they were found to be like worms, but without eyes, mouth, or stomach. Scientists now believe their food is absorbed through these red tentacles. It's through capturing magic images like these that Al Giddings has earned his reputation.
People approach me, and perhaps at a cocktail party, and will say, Al, gee, you must be one of the greatest underwater photographers in the world, or perhaps the greatest. And I smile and say, well, I like to think that I'm in the top 10, and incidentally, there are only about 5 of us. If that many.